Have you ever noticed how the borders in the Middle East look almost too straight? That's no accident. Over a century ago, two men, one British, one French, sat down and drew those lines, shaping the fate of millions. This was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret deal that still echoes in today's headlines. Britain and France, in the midst of World War I, decided the future of the Arab world, without consulting its people. Their plan was driven by ambition, colonial power, and a desire to control resources. The legacy? Decades of conflict, broken promises, and a region still grappling with the consequences. To understand today's Middle East, we have to go back to that quiet room where the map was redrawn. This isn't just a history lesson, it's the origin story of modern turmoil. We'll meet the men behind the deal, explore their motives, and see how their decisions cast a shadow that reaches us even now. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, a tale of secret negotiations, imperial ambition, and a world forever changed. Let's dive in and uncover how a few lines on a map could alter the course of history. By understanding this deal, we can better grasp the roots of today's challenges. The story begins in the chaos of World War I. To understand Sykes-Picot, we need to rewind to 1916, in the midst of World War I. The world was engulfed in a conflict unlike any before, with millions dying on the Western Front. Britain and France, desperate to defeat Germany, eyed the weakening Ottoman Empire as both a threat and an opportunity. The Ottomans, rulers of a vast region for centuries, were now known as the sick man of Europe. Their empire was crumbling, losing territory, and struggling to modernize. When the Ottomans sided with Germany, their lands became a prize for the Allies. Britain and France saw a chance to expand their empires and secure vital resources, especially oil. While soldiers fought in Europe and the Middle East, diplomats plotted a new world order. Sykes and Picot were chosen to turn imperial dreams into a secret plan. Their mission: redraw the map, regardless of the people living there. The fate of the Middle East was being decided far from the front lines. The stage was set for a deal that would change everything. The secret negotiations were about to begin. By 1915, World War I had become a global struggle, with empires clashing across continents. The Western Front was a bloody stalemate, pushing Britain and France to seek new strategies. The Middle East, rich in oil and strategic value, became a key focus. Control of oil fields in Mesopotamia and Persia was vital for fueling the war machine. The Suez Canal, lifeline of the British Empire, had to be protected at all costs. The Ottoman Empire, now an enemy, threatened these interests. Opening a new front in the east could shift the balance of power. For Britain and France, the Middle East was more than a battlefield. It was the future of their empires. Every move was calculated, every alliance weighed. The war was a deadly chess game, and the stakes were global dominance. Securing the Middle East meant securing victory, and the spoils of war. The secret deal was not just about borders, but about controlling the world's resources. The game was on, and the map was the prize. The Ottoman Empire, once a mighty force, was now weakened by internal strife and military defeats. European powers had long eyed its territories, waiting for the chance to divide them. In 1914, the Ottomans joined Germany, hoping to reclaim lost glory. This decision made the Middle East a new front in the war. Britain worried about oil and the Suez Canal. Russia eyed the strategic straits. The Allies launched campaigns in Gallipoli, Mesopotamia, and the Sinai, facing fierce resistance. The Gallipoli disaster and brutal desert warfare showed the cost of this new front. As the fighting raged, Britain and France began planning for the empire's collapse. The question was no longer if the Ottomans would fall, but how their lands would be divided. The stage was set for secret negotiations. The fate of millions hung in the balance. The carving up of the Middle East was about to begin. With the Ottomans now an enemy, old rivalries between Britain and France resurfaced. Both wanted to expand their empires into the Middle East, but neither trusted the other. France claimed historic ties to Syria and Lebanon, seeing itself as protector and investor. Britain's priority was securing the route to India, the Suez Canal, and oil-rich Mesopotamia. Each side feared being outmaneuvered by the other. Cooperation was necessary to win the war, but competition shaped their plans for peace. To avoid future conflict, they decided to secretly agree on how to divide the Ottoman lands. Mark Sykes and Francois-Georges Picot were chosen to negotiate the deal. Their task draw borders that served imperial interests, not local realities. The secret map would ignore the people who lived there. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was born out of ambition and distrust. The lines they drew would define the region for generations. Meet Sir Mark Sykes, Britain's man at the table. Aristocrat, traveler, and self-proclaimed expert on the Middle East, Sykes believed he knew what was best for the region, and for Britain. He saw the Middle East as a place needing British order and guidance. Sykes was driven by imperial ambition, convinced Britain should control the most valuable lands. His mission, secure the route to India and the oil fields of Mesopotamia. Sykes was a persuasive negotiator, confident in his vision. But he was also entangled in conflicting promises, supporting Arab independence while plotting imperial control. He believed he could satisfy everyone, but this would prove impossible. Sykes' contradiction set the stage for accusations of betrayal. His legacy would be one of broken promises and lasting resentment. As negotiations began, Sykes was determined to shape the future of the Middle East. The fate of millions rested on his decisions. The secret deal was about to take shape. Francois-Georges Picot, the consummate French diplomat, was Sykes's opposite, methodical, fiercely protective of French interests, and determined to secure France's claim to Greater Syria. He represented the powerful colonial party in Paris, seeing control over Syria as non-negotiable. Picot's stubbornness and suspicion of British motives shaped every tense negotiation. His unyielding focus ensured the French flag would fly over Damascus and Beirut. When Mark Sykes and Francois-Georges Picot first met in London in late 1915, it was, honestly, a classic encounter between two competing imperial powers. Their personalities were different, but their underlying mission was the same: to carve up the Ottoman Empire for the benefit of their own nations. The negotiations took place in secret, far from the prying eyes of the public, the press, and most importantly, the Arab leaders who were being promised independence. The fate of millions was being decided in quiet government offices, based on the strategic calculations and imperial ambitions of London and Paris. It was a cold, pragmatic exercise in power politics. The atmosphere of their discussions was a mix of forced politeness and deep-seated suspicion. Sykes, with his sweeping knowledge and grand pronouncements, tried to charm and persuade Picot. Picot, in return, remained reserved and dug in his heels, constantly pushing back against what he saw as British overreach. They would pore over maps, debating rivers, mountains, and towns that would serve as the future boundaries of their respective zones of control. It was a strange and surreal process. Two Europeans with a map and a grease pencil, drawing lines across lands neither of them truly knew, dividing peoples and communities with the stroke of a pen. The core of their argument was, really, a classic imperial tug-of-war. Picot demanded Syria for France, a claim Sykes was initially reluctant to accept. Sykes, in turn, insisted on British control over Mesopotamia, with its valuable oil fields, and the ports of Haifa and Acre to give Britain access to the Mediterranean. They haggled intensely over the territory in between, particularly Palestine, which held immense religious significance for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. The future of Jerusalem was a major sticking point, as neither side wanted the other to have sole control over the holy city. Eventually they would compromise, but every step was a battle. Ultimately, what brought them together was a shared fear. They both knew that if they didn't reach an agreement, their post-war rivalry could spiral out of control, potentially leading to conflict between Britain and France. They also had a third ally, Russia, to consider, which had its own ambitions for Ottoman territory. A secret deal was necessary to present a united front and prevent their imperial competition from undermining the war effort. And so, despite their personal differences and national rivalries, Sykes and Picot slowly hammered out a compromise. They produced a draft, a map with lines drawn on it, that would become one of history's most infamous agreements. In a secret wood-paneled room in London, Sykes and Picot quietly redrew the Middle East. Their plan, hidden from allies and the public, ignored the people living there, focusing instead on oil, railways, and empire. This web of secrecy and conflicting promises would shape the region for generations, with consequences still felt today. For François-Georges Picot and France, Syria was more than land. It was prestige, history, and economic power. France saw itself as protector of Christians and invested in the region's economy and culture. Picot fought for a vast French-controlled Syria, but had to compromise with Britain. In the end, he secured a new French empire in the Levant, France's prize after the war. Sir Mark Sykes shaped British strategy: protect the Suez Canal, secure oil in Mesopotamia and Persia, and create a land bridge from the Mediterranean to India. This meant controlling Egypt, Palestine, Transjordan, and Iraq, ensuring Britain's power, oil supply, and the route to India, while outmaneuvering rivals like France and Russia. After weeks of intense haggling, Sykes and Picot finally reached a compromise in early 1916. They formalized their discussions into a secret document, officially known as the Asia Minor Agreement, but forever remembered by their names. The agreement was a classic piece of imperial horse trading. It laid out exactly how Britain and France would divide the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire between them once the war was won. It was a blueprint for a new colonial order in the Middle East, created without any input from the people who actually lived there. It was a deal made by empires, for empires. The agreement was famously represented by a map. On this map, Sykes had taken a grease pencil and drawn a crude line from the E in Acre, a port on the coast of Palestine, to the last K in Kirkuk, an oil-rich city in northern Iraq. This simple line became known as the line in the sand. Everything north of this line was designated for France, and everything south of it was for Britain. It was a shockingly simplistic way to divide a region of immense complexity, ignoring geography, trade routes, and the ethnic and religious makeup of the communities it cut through. This arbitrary line is the most enduring and damning symbol of the entire agreement. The map detailed different levels of control. Certain areas were to be under direct colonial rule. France would get direct control over the Lebanese coast and parts of southern Turkey, the so-called Blue Zone. Britain would get direct control over southern Mesopotamia, including Baghdad and Basra, the Red Zone. Other areas were designated as spheres of influence, where Britain and France would allow semi-independent Arab states to exist, but with the European powers having exclusive rights to appoint advisors and control the economy. The French zone of influence, called Area A, covered inland Syria, while the British zone, Area B, covered what would become Jordan and the Iraqi desert. Finally, the agreement addressed the most sensitive area, Palestine. Because of its importance to three world religions, neither side could let the other have sole control. They compromised on a vague formula, designating the area around Jerusalem, the Brown Zone, to be under some form of international administration, the details of which would be decided later in consultation with other allies, including Russia. This deliberate ambiguity over Palestine would store up immense problems for the future. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was now complete. It was a secret pact, a colonial blueprint, and a ticking time bomb waiting for the end of the war to explode. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was a secret plan by Britain, France, and Russia to divide the Middle East after World War I. But in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution erupted. Lenin's new government exposed the secret, publishing it for the world to see. The revelation shattered trust, sparking outrage and a legacy of bitterness in the region. The Sykes-Picot Agreement exposed a web of British promises: land to the French, independence to the Arabs, and a homeland in Palestine to the Zionists. These promises were impossible to reconcile, leaving Arab leaders feeling deeply betrayed. This sense of betrayal fueled Arab nationalism and anti-Western sentiment for decades to come. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Britain and France, at the Paris Peace Conference, needed a new way to control the Middle East. Their answer was the mandate system, presented as a path to self-rule, but really colonialism in disguise. New borders were drawn, dividing lands and people, creating lasting consequences for the region. The Sykes-Picot Agreement drew lines in the sand, dividing the Middle East with little regard for its people. These artificial borders created lasting divisions, fueling conflict and resentment. For many, Sykes-Picot remains a symbol of Western interference, its legacy, not peace or order but fractured nations and enduring distrust. The Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Mandate system redrew the Middle East, creating unstable borders and deep divisions. Britain and France's actions fueled decades of conflict, from Palestine to Iraq and Syria. The struggle for oil, power, and identity, set in motion by these colonial deals, continues to shape the region's fate today. Over a century later, the Sykes-Picot Agreement still shapes the Middle East. Its legacy is seen in border disputes, political tensions, and the struggles of groups like the Kurds. The lines drawn by Sykes and Picot created divisions that fuel conflict and define lives to this day, a powerful reminder of history's lasting impact.